See. Tim Walther, how you doing today?
Doing great.
Awesome. So we had our little technical fun trying to get started, but we're good now.
Yeah, we can hear each other, so that's good.
Exactly. Yeah, that helps. So you're joining us from Maryland, and are you a Maryland native? Is that where you kind of grew up in that area?
I am. I'm in Frederick, Maryland right now, and I grew up in Ellicott City, Maryland. So yeah, I've been here my whole life. I went away to college for 4 years to James Madison and came back.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a beautiful area. And there are a lot of festivals there in the summertime, of which some of the biggest ones you're actually responsible for. And when did you start the festival? Was the All Good Now festival when originally you started? When did that happen, and how did you get into that?
Well, the first festival I ever did was called the Full Moon Music Festival.
Oh,
And
okay.
I guess to go back a step, so I toured with the Grateful Dead. I did like 52 shows with the Grateful Dead, and I was there when Jerry passed, and when Jerry passed away, I had been going to a lot of shows at that point, and we kind of all looked around like, what are we going to do now? The Grateful Dead's no more. Yeah,
Right.
then, and I was at the time I was already doing street promotion for some bands, and I got inspired. But I was going to these festivals at Wilmer's Park in Brandywine, Maryland. They were camp out music festivals, and they weren't being produced very well. They weren't being run very well. They weren't being attended very well. And I just like, hey, maybe I can do this. And basically by myself and a couple $100. Yeah, I don't know how I did it, but I got it started with the Full Moon Music Festival, and I realized on the second year of the Full Moon Music Festival, I couldn't have the full moon on a weekend every year because obviously it changes where it lands.
Right,
So,
right.
so I decided to call it the All Good Music Festival, and it was that ever since.
Awesome. And those festivals have been very successful. Along with that, you're the manager for Dark Star Orchestra, which is a very popular band. Tell me how you got into the jam band scene. You mentioned touring with the Dead. What was your original inspiration for that? Were you a big music fan of those kind of that genre when growing up, or how did that happen?
Um, I mean, I don't know. It seems like it all goes back to Grateful Dead. I was a sophomore in college, and my friends were going to the Cap Center in DC, and they're like, "Hey, Tim, you want to go along?" And like, "What are you doing?" "We're going to see the Grateful Dead." And to me, the Grateful Dead was like a country band. I didn't really know anything about them, didn't
Right.
have interest in them, but I went anyway, and I really went for the party. And I put a square piece of paper on my tongue, and then everything changed.
Yeah, you see music a little differently.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and it's awesome because I think that scene, and people don't realize, I mean, they know the Dead musically, but the people that are actually who followed the Dead for decades, it was really a big family, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that family has, it's odd how it's grown, even after they passed. I mean, Bobby Weir just passed back in February. He's like the last, front member of the Grateful Dead. And, so the Grateful Dead will never be what it was. But back in the day, it was like we were the druggies, the guys that were out of control, the partiers, like we didn't get any respect from any community. You know, if anything, the police hassled us and gave us a hard time. And um, somehow over the years it became a lore and it became popular and it became accepted by mainstream. I think when Ted Koppel had something to say about it on ABC, putting
Yeah.
when he put the Grateful Dead in a good light, I was like, wow, we made it to some kind of a mainstream appeal here.
Yeah, and they managed to have at least I know one big kind of a big pop hit that was an MTV hit. What was the scene? What did the people in the Dead family feel about that when they kind of started getting that kind of attention? Was it a good thing? Was it a how was that perceived?
Well, the radio song that come along was called "The Touch of Grey." I think
Right.
that's the song you're talking about,
Yeah.
and that's exactly when I got on tour with them in 1987. That's when they broke out that song, and certainly wasn't. You know, when I got to the scene, people had already been on the scene for 15 and 18 years,
Right.
and I was called a touch of grayer because I was like the mainstream guy that came in with the touch of gray.
You're like, yeah, that's funny.
It was funny.
Yeah. Tell me about obviously with the passing of Jerry and Bob Weir, where have those fans tended to migrate to? Because I know there's other bands like Widespread Panic. There's different bands in the same genre. Where have a lot of those fans gone, in your opinion, kind of headed towards?
Um, yeah, I feel like I feel like the late '60s created the jam band scene, and the Grateful Dead was part of that, and so were a lot of other bands. So I feel like the jam band scene really came around the '90s as far as being coined the jam band scene. But I think it stemmed from all that kind of psychedelic rock from the late '60s and early '70s, and you know, and the Grateful Dead really brought together the light on the jam band scene, and bands started kind of spinning off of that back in the mid '90s into 2000s, and there's probably 50 kind of 50 jam bands right now, and I work with probably 48 of them.
Yeah.
But the big ones are Billy Strings right now, and Goose and
Right.
Fish, and these are bands that are keeping the scene alive in that way. But there's a lot of smaller bands up and coming ones like Damage and Others, Cosmic Country, Kitchen Dwellers, Dogs in a Pile. It's feel good dance music. Families get together, or
Mhm.
gets together. Just good stuff.
Yeah, and it's nice to see, like you mentioned, Billy Strings, who's somebody who's really exploded on the scene, and it's nice to see that vibrance of younger artists coming into it and keeping it alive, and also even like growing it in different directions. Uh,
Sure.
and that's a big part of your festivals because it kind of talk about you mentioned working with a lot of those bands, but talk about some of the people that are on your festivals coming up because it's a who's who of that scene.
Yeah, sure. The Dark Star Jubilee is 3 nights of Dark Star. They close the show, and Little Feat's there, and Melvin Seals and JGB are there. Melvin used to play with Jerry Garcia and the Jerry
Um,
Garcia band, so he's still out there doing his thing and doing really well. We got Little Feat playing their final tour. So we're one of the last shows they're going to do, probably the last show ever in Ohio. Um, and then when you get to All Good Now, it's 2 nights widespread. And Les Claypool's doing this really cool thing. It's called Claypool Gold, where he's playing three of his bands are going to play each individually within a 90-minute set. So his Primus is going to put in like a 30-minute set.
wow.
Les Claypool's Frog Brigade is going to put in a 30-minute set. And then Sean Lennon and Les Claypool are going to put their Lennon Delirium set together. And it's going to be pretty wild. It's going to be interesting to see how that all takes place. And then you've got Green Sky Bluegrass and the Wood Brothers and Larkin Poe, and um, really looking forward to the All Good Now. It's going to be a good mix.
Yeah, and where is the All Good Festival? Where's that held?
Takes place at Meriwether Post Pavilion.
Okay, in
It's
Maryland, right?
Yeah, it's right here in Columbia, Maryland, 10 minutes from where I grew up.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's exciting. So what's the funnest part about well, actually for you doing these festivals? Because obviously the festival thing for people who haven't done those, I'm a musician as well. The
Sure.
people who haven't done the festivals, it's quite an undertaking. It's a
Right, right.
lot like herding kittens and cattle all at the same time. Tell
Yeah.
me about the challenges of putting together those kinds of large festivals.
Well, it started with two people on a staff, and like we did 1,000 people our first festival, and I was pulling friends out of cars and like, hey, can you help me do the show?
Right.
Can you help me take tickets, that kind of stuff. And it was a learning process. So, my original goal was when I started in the festival world was like, if I can get to 10,000 people in 10 years, that would be
Right.
all, so it was a building process of, 924 people to 1,800 people the next year, to 3,200 people the next year, to 4,000 next year, to 5,000, to 6,000, to 8,000, to 10,000. And that was like me growing the jam band festival along with the jam band scene. So it's like the bands were growing, I was in the right place at the right time. I had uh, potentially, I may have had the largest jam band festival, Marvin's Mountaintop. We did like 23,000 people on top of a mountain for 3 days of camping.
Wow.
Had like 1,200 employees and all kinds of fun there. I was able to manage it myself, just kind of using common sense and working with some people that had some knowledge about how this all works up until about 10,000 people. And then I brought in the professionals that could really take it to the next level because it's a lot to handle. There's a lot to handle at 10,000. I was like, okay, I can't, I need some help.
Yeah, and there's a lot of just business stuff, just the insurance and all that stuff that we all know the Woodstock story where it just got
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
real
But
crazy.
the real challenge for us was getting 23,000 people up on top of a mountain down a one lane country road.
Yeah, I could bet. Plus, you're hoping for good weather. That's the other thing. When you do these outdoor festivals, the nature has a way of making its own decision about how that's going to go, right?
Sure.
That's part of the story. Did you how have you maintained your passion for all this? Because obviously there's a lot of business, a lot of parts and pieces. Is that it's something that's still, it seems like something that you're still very passionate about. Talk a little bit about that and about just the music in general.
Well, I've always been fortunate that the jam band scene, the music that I promote, and the bands that I work with are are music that I like. You know, so I don't really book. I still don't book bands that I don't really care for.
Yeah.
Like even the agents that I work with that have 20 bands on their roster, there'll be 4 or 5 bands I work with, and then I don't work with the rest, and it gets kind of annoying for them. But like, you know, I uh I, I am fortunate I've had enough business with the bands I like to be able to move forward with that and be successful. So I mean, what I get out of it is introducing these bands to the fans, you know, and I'm kind of the go-to guy here in the Baltimore D.C. market for the jam band thing. And you know, I worked with 12 different venues in Baltimore and DC, and fans go to my website to find out what's going on in the jam band world as opposed to going to the venues to find out who's playing in their venue. So, you know, and that helps me like build my situation with the bands where if they want to be, you know, if they want to be in touch with their fans in this market, you know, they want to go through me kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of that is trust too for the band. You mentioned building relationships.
right.
Talk about how important that is because the bands have to trust you. There's obviously the money part of it, but also just the organizational aspect. They don't want to sign on to a big festival if it's going to be a mess. And obviously, you have a huge track record and a long track record. Talk about the trust aspect and building relationships and what you do.
Yeah, I mean it's the same as in, you know, in the rest of my life. It's like I like I've never canceled a show. You know, I've done 70 festivals, I've done 2,000, 2,500 club shows. Some bands have canceled on me due to weather or due to something else, but I've never canceled a show. It's kind of like it's the promoter I don't know, what do you call it? It's the number one rule as a promoter. Like the show must go on.
Right. And that's a huge deal because people don't realize how often that does actually happen. So that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sorry, get back to your question again. Can you repeat
Yeah,
that
I
for
was
me?
just saying in terms of building trust and relationships with the bands and the managers and how important is that for what you do?
Yeah, it's really delivering on what they expect and what you tell them you're going to do. And you know, since I do have a good relationship or good reputation for throwing these successful festivals, for them being well run, for the bands, I try to look at you know, I try to set the stage the best I can for both the bands and the fans. You know, from the time we announce, you know, the fans are getting, you know, kind messaging from us. You know, they're getting schooled on what these bands are all about and what's going to happen at the festival and how it's going to be. And then the bands are the same way. It's like we're taking the best care of them that we can as they get to the festival. When they're at the festival, you know, when the band's excited and happy backstage and they feel like they're taken good care of, they're going to go out there and give it their best. And when the fans are out there waiting for them to get on stage and they've been treated as best as they can, you know, then the magic happens between the bands and the fans, and that's where my excitement comes in when I'm at the festival and I can see that connection happening and you know just feel good about being a part of bringing it together like that. That's you know that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, that's the excitement and the love that you get a chance to share that with the fans.
Right.
When you put together a festival, because there's a lot of made like we have the festivals that just happen in Indio and all that stuff, but putting together the lineup, talk about if you could about the alchemy of that. Like it's kind of like baking a cake, and you have to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and not all the same ingredients.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that aspect of putting together what you do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you start with the headliners, you know, because they kind of uh, craft your whole festival. So you book the headliners and you book everything else to support the headliners. You know, so I try to book the headliners and then book the band right below the headliner, the band that's going to, you know, spin the best right into that next band, and so forth all the way down. You know, and you don't want a bluegrass band and a bluegrass band or a funk band and a funk band. It's like, you know, tend to just kind of mix it up. And I've always had my own recipe. I don't know how unique it is, but it seems to be something that attracts fans. And it's a mix of different types of jam bands. And it's like when you go out there and you go to these events and you go to these club shows, or I go to these club shows, and I get a feel for the band and their energy, and then I can say, well, this energy and this style of music feels good with this energy and this style of music. So I can just kind of imagine how that's going to melt together. Um, because it's not just the music. I think it's the energy that these bands put forth as far as, what energy you should run into the next level of energy.
Yeah, you could be a
That
great
makes sense.
being a great band, but also being a live performance. Those are not always the same thing. They don't
That
necessarily translate. Hopefully they do, but um, yeah. So talk if you could maybe give some advice to young bands because there's a lot of bands that they love the jam band scene. They're trying to break into that, or maybe they approach you. I'm sure that happens all the time as well. What are some of the things that you look for when bands approach you and young artists?
um, well, like the band doesn't really get to me until they've been around probably for 5 years or so. I mean, the jam band scene, it takes, outside of a Billy Strings or a Goose, these bands that in 3 or 4 years went from zero to 1,000, which is a really, really successful run. And then they went from 1,000 to 10,000 in the next 4 years, that kind of thing. But
Right.
the standard jam band might take 10 years to get to the point where they're doing 400 or 500 people. So I might get them at year 5 when they're worth 150 tickets. And, so it's like certain fans, they have to or bands, they have to graduate to the point where they're drawing, most bands start in a local front or a regional front. And they can go out and do some business
Right.
locally, regionally. For them to break out of that situation where they're doing 3 to 500 local regional situation and then go to the national playing field is just a whole nother ball game. And it's tough. I mean, I think I have so much respect for the artists. And like I've always had the privilege of, if this band doesn't work for me, I can go to the next band.
Right.
The artists don't have that privilege. And I think the only way, if was to give any advice to the young artist, I would say, if this is what you want to do and this is what you want to do for the rest of your life, and you're willing to do whatever it takes, if it takes 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years to make a living, that's the only way you're going to make it. You can't just say, oh, I want to be a rock star, I'm going to go out there and make some money. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's sort of you have to be all in. And do you like obviously Billy Strings, a big part of his story is social media. He kind of really blew up on social media. Is that something that you pay attention to when you're looking at acts? Does that matter for you or not? Or
It does. I mean, social media can be very misleading. Sometimes a band can have, 100,000 monthly followers or whatever on Spotify and be worth 10 tickets. It's just
right,
like in the jam band scene, it's very organic. And these bands, they have to really have the fans. If a jam band has a really large amount of social following, I think it says something because their music doesn't necessarily go out to the mainstream and just um, tick up and likes and stuff all around the world kind of thing. It's just
yeah, and it doesn't then tend to be 2 minute songs. It tends to be longer and open and jammy, and as you mentioned, and so yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like I think that's something that you mentioned. Like they could be very popular on social media, but not necessarily that doesn't necessarily translate to ticket sales. And I think the jam band world, they seem like they make you want they want you to really earn it more than the pop world. Do you think?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is good.
You brought up Billy Stringer, and it reminded me of um, during COVID. I did a showtime at the drive-in here in Frederick, Maryland, just like a mile from my house, and it was really successful. I was the only one doing music in the Baltimore, D.C. Metropolitan. But bands like Goose and like Billy Strings, they were worth 500 tickets going to COVID, and coming out of COVID, they're worth like 2,000 tickets. It's just like they built themselves by social media, by playing shows in their living room for their fans and putting it up, putting it out to the world. And it was amazing to see those two bands in particular. They really launched their careers during COVID. Like, a lot of bands, if you did the opposite and you just shut down during COVID and you were a band, you came out behind where you left off.
Right.
And a lot of bands lost their situation and actually never recovered from it. So
Yeah, a lot of venues closed and never reopened. That's another part of that. I was in a band that was touring quite heavily on the East Coast. A lot of those little clubs, sadly, didn't reopen. So that's affected the routing, and for
Yeah.
tour routing, as you know, that's always a big challenge for booking groups and that kind of thing. But it's great to see, for me, like to see guys like Billy Strings, or you mentioned these other bands. It's really exciting to see new fresh blood coming onto the scene, not only in the jam band world, but just in general. I think it's exciting. And I like the fact that the jam band world, they expect you to really earn it. It's not just because you have 1 million followers, they still expect you to show up and do the gigs. And
And the other side of that is that you know, when you earn the jam band fan and they're into your music and they're coming to your shows, they're with you for life.
right,
Like they're very loyal. Where other types of bands might come out, they have a hit song or something like that, and people are all excited about it, and they're getting their friends and they're going. But then when that band comes back and they don't have that pop hit or whatever turned them on, then those fans are fair weather fans, I guess you would call them.
right. Yeah, and there's, I many years ago I worked with Widespread Panic doing production, and I had not heard of them at that point. And I showed up to this gig, and there was so many people with all the recording the show and doing that whole thing. And I was like, man, this is a whole scene I didn't even know anything about. I
Yeah.
obviously knew about
Yeah.
the band, of course, but it's nice to see. And there's a lot of great musicians in these bands as well, which is it's really fun to see. Um, Tim, how can people get a hold of you and also check out the schedules for the festivals and all that information?
Well, they can go to allgoodpresents.com, and we have everything on there from our three festivals, all in one place, and all of our club shows and that kind of thing. They can also go to allgoodnow.com and darkstarjubilee.com and 4848festival.com. Each festival has a different has their own website and that kind of thing, but the the hub is at All Good Presents.
Okay, awesome. And I'll include that in the podcast description so people can find you. I love what you're doing. I think it's really awesome. The average person that hasn't done festivals, maybe not don't have really an idea of what it takes to do that. And the fact that you've done this for so many years really speaks to you and also your team. Because that's we should talk about that, because it's not a one-man operation. I'm sure it's a big team.
Okay.
Talk about the importance of that, building the team over the years.
I mean, the team is everything. Like right now, I have it's really about six people that just you know, do everything besides what the undercard does, and my like I've got a VIP person that just kicks ass on VIP across the board, and then I've got a staff person and a tech person and a marketing guy, and it's like my marketing guy's been with me for 15 years, my production guy's been with me for 20 years, so we all we're all just kind of like a fine-tuned machine. They know what I need from them before I do, and it's a family thing. I couldn't do what I'm doing any longer without this team, because I couldn't, I've been around too long to start over with these things basically. So these people are really uh, part of the family and part of the success for sure.
Yeah, and when you go to war, so to speak, on the festivals, you need everybody you can count on, you trust, and that's super important. And it takes years to build that, as you mentioned. So that's very awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you're a very busy guy, and it took a little bit to get this together, but I really appreciate your time.
Okay, I appreciate it too. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a great day, Tim.
You too. See
Bye.
you later.